So we really are connected to this big global web. Feels kind of overwhelming. And what it means is that we're very detached from the things that we buy. That you could imagine, like, let's all go back to, at my house it's channel 49, the Hallmark channel. Let's all go back to, Little House on the Prairie, okay? All right, so you went to the Olson's General Store, right? And you bought stuff. Well, you had a sense of where it came from. I mean, you're buying your eggs from, Farmer Brown, and you were buying, you took your horse to be shoed at blacksmith Mr. Jones. And I mean, there was this sense of connectivity. You sort of knew where things were coming from, and you actually knew, like, how these people were treating their families, how these people were treating their animals, how these people were treating the land and that sort of thing. So there was a greater, we were more closely connected to sort of where things came from. Or a lot of times we made our own stuff. Right now we're in a society where we just buy everything. We don't actually ever make anything. Okay? So as a result of being sort of detached from, who's really making our stuff, we can sometimes inadvertently contribute a great deal to the suffering of other people by buying things or patronizing stores that are engaged in sorts of practices that are terrible. One of the worst stories I heard was that there's this factory in China where prior to Christmas one year, Toys R Us had this contract with somebody who had a contract with somebody who had a contract with somebody who had a contract. I mean, the layers are just immensely complicated. But you sort of trace it all the way back to this factory, and they had to get these like plastic things, toys that were being made for Toys R Us, and there was all this pressure, had to get it in the store by a certain time so that, parents that were Christmas shopping could have it. And literally, there were factory workers who literally were dying from being worked to death. They were being forced to work 18 or 20 hours a day, 7 days a week in the factory to try to make the orders so that we could go to Toys R Us and buy these toys. All right, so let me read this quote. Because, of course, we don't mean to do that, right? It's not like we're really excited about that. This is a quote from a book that Ken mentioned last night, the William Cavanaugh book, Being Consumed. He says, quote, "Most of us would never deliberately choose our material comfort over the life of another person. Most of us do not consciously choose to work others to death for the sake of lower prices on the things we buy. But we participate in such an economy because we are detached from the producers, the people who actually make our things. Not only are the people who make our things a world away, but we're prevented from learning about where our products come from by a whole host of roadblocks, by this layers of complexity that I mentioned. How do you find the company, and then they have a subcontract with somebody else, and they have a subcontract with somebody else, and trying to actually figure out, like, who actually made this thing I'm wearing from China is very difficult. And so we inhabit these sort of separate worlds. There's the world of the people that are making all of our stuff, and there's sort of our world as we buy it. So there's this fundamental problem of detachment. And what's really depressing about this, in case you're not already depressed enough, is that not only is this a problem sort of in the area called clothing, but this is pervasive in many, many areas. It's not just about the clothes we buy, it's also about the food that we buy. It's about the kind of energy consumption that we have, the gasoline that we buy, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So feels completely overwhelming. All right, so what are we going to do about that? So again, I'm arguing we're trying to push against radical individualism, and so we're now going to say, what practical steps might we do to try to say, how do I begin to put into my radar screen the well-being of others a little bit more distant from me and my initial circle, so that their well-being can begin to influence some of my own economic choices, since I really am connected to these other people. All right? Now, the first thing I need to do is give a caveat, which is I'm not going to now talk about any sort of policy level stuff right now. Now, there are people that like to talk about policy level things. There are people that like to talk about, how should we advocate for corporate responsibility, or how should we advocate for different government policies that have to do with free trade or fair trade or blah, 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 blah. And all those are very important issues, but our time is very limited. And I understood my assignment to really be more about our sort of personal, individual kind of level choices and responses. So what I just want to say are a few things about our personal behavior. All right? And I want to encourage us to simply take literally 1 or 2 first steps in trying to become more aware of what we're buying, where it's from, and what its true cost is. All right? Because price is how much it costs us. But cost begins to get us connected to what was the cost in other people's lives for the production of this thing that I am purchasing. And what is the cost of my decision to buy it from this vendor versus that vendor, because there may be societal costs to the environment or to other people beyond just the price that I'm paying for it. How do we avoid contributing to companies that are engaged in violating human rights when we obviously would want to try to do so? Okay, so 1 or 2 areas. The reason I say 1 or 2 areas is because, hello, you could have to quit your job and ignore all of your other responsibilities and spend 23 hours a day trying to actually figure out this complicated animal. If you actually wanted to try to buy your clothing responsibly and your gasoline responsibly and your food, if you took all the things that we just buy and how complicated globalization is, and you really wanted to be this responsible consumer that cared about other people, you'd have to just quit everything else you're doing, because it would take you that long to try to figure out where it's all coming from. So let me tell you what I'm doing in my life. One really, really small thing. In the area of food, I'm simply trying to buy more local produce. All right? I'm trying to not contribute to agribusiness and whatever. The other thing I'm doing is I'm a total cheapskate. So one of the things I'm trying to do is simply change and shift my own attitudes about how I think about price and cost. Some of you are familiar with the book The Omnivore's Dilemma by Michael Pollan. And he talks about the meat industry and whatever. And so I'm just trying to basically in my own life I'm one of these people that gets the circulars, and I'm shopping at Kroger for this and at Food Lion for that and at Giant for this, and talk about go to Whole Foods and buy from Whole Foods. I don't think so, because I'm a cheapskate. But one of the things little baby step I'm taking is to say, you know what? I'm going to start buying organic meat from Whole Foods. It's more expensive. So part of me feels is that really good stewardship? I could go get it at, for $5.99 a pound at Food Lion. It's going to cost me $8.99 a pound to get it at Whole Foods. But I'm trying to begin to shift my thinking so that this issue of price is not the exclusive factor by which I'm making that choice. Yes, the price to me of buying my meat at Food Lion is in fact less than the price to me of buying organic meat at Whole Foods. But the cost of my decision to buy it there, in terms of how it affects some other people, is actually higher than the cost that it is. So that's just one little area. I know people who are just trying to think about things like, for example, there's an initiative called Rugmark. And it's all about this group of people that are trying to look at the rug and carpet industry and trying to discern where are rugs and carpets being made without child-bonded labor. Little children in these sweatshops, and so you can buy a rug that's got a little label on it called Rugmark, and there's people out there investigating, where this is happening. All right. So I've given you a resource sheet. I passed it out, and on that resource sheet, under the area of buying, I've given you some websites, some magazines, some different places where you can go, some Christian resources and some secular resources. Frankly, some resources that some of you are going to feel are a little bit too politically liberal for you. That's fine.